There was a time when a red spoon on a cookbook cover meant dinner was going to be something special. Long before food trends came and went, kitchens across America trusted one familiar name, Betty Crocker. Her recipes weren't just instructions, they were promises. Promises of golden casseroles, perfectly frosted cakes, and meals that brought families to the same table every night. But somewhere along the way, many of those beloved dishes quietly disappeared. Today, we're opening the old recipe box and rediscovering 10 forgotten classics that once defined home cooking in America. Tunnel of fudge cake. In 1966, a chocolate cake changed everything. When the tunnel of fudge cake won second place in the Pillsbury Bake-Off, home bakers rushed to recreate its rich, molten center. Soon after, Betty Crocker featured her own version, and the recipe became a sensation. Unlike ordinary layer cakes with fluffy frosting, this dessert hid its magic inside, a dense, gooey tunnel of chocolate that formed naturally as it baked. What made it unforgettable wasn't just the taste. It was the mystery. You poured thick batter into a bundt pan, slid it into the oven, and hoped you had trusted the timing just right. Cut too soon and it collapsed. Bake it perfectly, and a silky ribbon of fudge revealed itself with the first slice. The cake's popularity also boosted sales of bundt pans across America. Suddenly, kitchens everywhere were filled with the scent of cocoa and toasted walnuts. It became a staple at church suppers, potlucks, and holiday gatherings. Mothers clipped the recipe from magazines and tucked it into metal recipe boxes, stained with years of chocolate smudges. But as boxed brownies and molten lava cakes took over, the original tunnel of fudge slowly faded from modern tables. Its reliance on specific frostings and careful technique made it feel old-fashioned in an era of shortcuts. Yet one bite reminds you why it mattered. It isn't just chocolate cake, it's patience, anticipation, and the pride of slicing into something that surprises everyone at the table. This is the kind of dessert that deserves a comeback, rich and unapologetically indulgent. Tomato aspic mold. There was a time when elegance shimmered on the dinner table, literally. In the 1950s and early 1960s, few dishes captured mid-century sophistication quite like the tomato aspic mold. Featured in countless editions of Betty Crocker cookbooks, this savory gelatin creation was considered refined, modern, and impressively domestic. Tomato juice was seasoned with celery, onion, vinegar, and sometimes Worcestershire sauce, then blended with unflavored gelatin and poured into decorative molds. Once chilled, it emerged as a glistening ruby centerpiece, often crowned with a dollop of mayonnaise or surrounded by crisp lettuce leaves. For hostesses eager to prove their culinary skill, it was a showstopper. Aspic itself wasn't new. It traced back to European culinary traditions, but post-war America embraced it with enthusiasm. Refrigerators had become household staples, and molded salads symbolized convenience mixed with creativity. The tomato aspic mold, in particular, felt bold and grown-up. It wasn't sweet like Jell-O desserts. It was savory, structured, and slightly mysterious. At church luncheons and bridge parties, it signaled sophistication. The wobbly texture may raise eyebrows today, but at the time, it represented innovation. Home cooks experimented with shrimp, diced vegetables, or even stuffed olives suspended inside the crimson gel. Each slice revealed a cross-section of careful planning. As food trends shifted toward fresh greens and simpler sides, aspic molds quietly disappeared. Their glossy finish began to feel dated rather than dazzling. Yet there's something undeniably fascinating about this dish. It reflects a moment when presentation mattered deeply, when hosting meant spectacle. The tomato aspic mold may not grace every modern table, but it tells a vivid story of ambition, style, and a generation eager to embrace the future in shimmering form. Chicken a la king. Before fast food buckets and frozen dinners ruled weeknights, there was a creamy skillet dish that felt almost regal. Chicken a la king, proudly printed in mid-century editions of Betty Crocker cookbooks, brought a touch of luxury to ordinary evenings. The recipe was simple but comforting: tender diced chicken folded into a velvety sauce of butter, flour, cream, and chicken broth. Pimentos added color, mushrooms brought earthiness, and green peppers gave it a gentle bite. The mixture was spooned generously over toast points, rice, or buttery puff pastry shells. It looked elegant, yet it was made from leftovers more often than not. Its origins trace back to the late 19th century, but by the 1950s it had become a staple of American home cooking. Post-war families wanted meals that felt refined without being complicated. Chicken à la king delivered that balance. It was hearty but polished, practical yet indulgent. For many households, Sunday's roast chicken didn't end on Sunday. On Monday, it transformed into this creamy masterpiece. Mothers relied on it for bridge club luncheons and family suppers alike. The aroma of simmering cream sauce drifting through the kitchen meant something warm and filling was on the way. Over time, however, tastes shifted toward lighter fare and bolder flavors. The thick cream sauce began to feel heavy compared to modern preferences. Gradually, the dish slipped from weekly rotations into memory. But revisit it today, and it still satisfies. There's something deeply comforting about spooning that rich sauce over crisp toast. Chicken à la king reminds us of a time when leftovers became something special, and when a simple chicken dish could feel like royalty at the dinner table. 7-layer dinner. Before slow cookers had digital timers and meal kits promised convenience, there was a humble casserole that built itself in layers. The 7-layer dinner, printed in mid-century editions of Betty Crocker cookbooks, was the definition of practical ingenuity. The magic began with raw ground beef spread across the bottom of a baking dish. Over it came sliced potatoes, then onions, carrots, rice, canned tomatoes, and finally a blanket of seasoning and sometimes cabbage. Each ingredient was added uncooked, one careful layer at a time. Then it was covered tightly and baked slowly, allowing the flavors to mingle and the steam to work its quiet transformation. There was no stirring, no complicated technique, just trust in the order of things. As it baked, the rice absorbed savory juices, the potatoes softened, and the beef released rich flavor upward through every layer. By dinner time, the once separate ingredients had become a unified, hearty meal. This dish thrived during the 1940s and 1950s, when stretching ingredients mattered. It was affordable, filling, and dependable. Mothers could assemble it in the afternoon and let the oven do the work while they managed the rest of the household. The 7-layer dinner wasn't glamorous. It didn't sparkle with presentation, but it fed families generously, often with leftovers for the next day. As culinary trends shifted toward fresher, faster dishes, this slow-baked staple quietly disappeared. Yet it stands as a reminder of resourcefulness, of making something substantial from simple pantry staples. One baking dish, 7 layers, and the promise that patience could turn the ordinary into something deeply satisfying. Pineapple upside-down cake. Before towering layer cakes and extravagant frostings took center stage, there was a dessert that revealed its beauty only at the very end. Pineapple upside-down cake became a sensation in mid-century kitchens, especially after appearing in editions of Betty Crocker cookbooks. It wasn't just cake, it was a performance. Brown sugar and butter melted together in the bottom of a round pan, creating a bubbling caramel base. Canned pineapple rings were arranged carefully on top, each center often filled with a bright red maraschino cherry. Then the pale cake batter was poured over everything, hiding the design beneath. Into the oven it went, where the sugar thickened into a glossy syrup and the fruits softened into sweetness. The real drama happened after baking. The pan had to rest briefly, just long enough to loosen the caramel without letting it harden. Then came the moment of truth, a serving plate pressed on top, a steady grip, and one confident flip. When lifted, the cake revealed golden pineapple rings glistening like stained glass. In the 1950s and 1960s, this dessert symbolized hospitality. It was served at potlucks, birthdays, and Sunday suppers. The use of canned fruit reflected the era's love of convenience foods, while the caramelized topping felt indulgent and special. Over time, as fresh fruit desserts and elaborate frostings grew popular, pineapple upside-down cake began to feel nostalgic rather than modern. Yet its charm endures. It reminds us of kitchens filled with anticipation, of mothers steadying their hands before the flip, and of the quiet pride that came from revealing something beautiful hidden beneath the surface. Beef stroganoff. There was a time when a skillet of creamy noodles could make an ordinary weeknight feel elegant. Beef stroganoff, featured in mid-century editions of Betty Crocker cookbooks, brought international flair into American kitchens without ever feeling intimidating. Though its roots trace back to 19th century Russia, the American version took on a life of its own in the 1950s and 1960s. Tender strips of beef were browned quickly, then simmered gently with onions and mushrooms. A sauce of beef broth and sour cream transformed the pan drippings into something silky and rich. Spoon it over a bed of buttered egg noodles, and dinner felt both hearty and refined. For families eager to try continental cooking after World War II, beef stroganoff felt adventurous yet safe. It used familiar ingredients but introduced a new name and a slightly different flavor profile. Sour cream, once considered exotic, became a pantry staple thanks in part to this dish. It was also practical. Leftover roast beef could be sliced thin and revived in the creamy sauce. Busy households appreciated how quickly it came together, especially compared to traditional roasts or stews. The aroma of simmering mushrooms and beef drifting through the house promised warmth on cold evenings. As lighter, tomato-based pastas and global flavors rose in popularity, stroganoff slowly stepped aside. Its thick cream sauce began to feel heavy in a health-conscious era. Yet one forkful still delivers comfort. The tender beef, the velvety sauce, the way it coats every strand of noodle, it's a reminder of a time when fancy didn't mean complicated. Beef stroganoff once bridged cultures and brought a touch of old-world charm to American dinner tables. Salmon loaf. There was a time when a neatly sliced loaf on a serving platter signaled thrift, nutrition, and careful planning. Salmon loaf, featured in mid-century editions of Betty Crocker cookbooks, was a dependable solution for families seeking something hearty yet affordable. Made with canned salmon, breadcrumbs, eggs, and a splash of milk, the mixture was pressed into a loaf pan and baked until firm. Some recipes added chopped onion or celery for texture, while others topped it with a thin tomato glaze. Once baked, it was sliced just like meatloaf and often served with mashed potatoes and peas. Canned salmon became popular in the early 20th century as improved canning methods made seafood more accessible inland. By the 1940s and 1950s, it was a pantry staple. Salmon loaf allowed home cooks to stretch a relatively small amount of fish into a filling family meal. It delivered protein, comfort, and economy in one tidy package. For many households, Friday dinners meant fish, and salmon loaf fit perfectly into that routine. It wasn't flashy, but it was reliable. The scent of baking salmon mingled with onions created a familiar, comforting aroma that signaled dinner was nearly ready. Over time, however, tastes shifted toward grilled fillets and fresher seafood preparations. The idea of baking canned fish into a loaf began to feel outdated. Gradually, salmon loaf disappeared from regular rotation. Yet it represents a practical era of cooking, one that valued resourcefulness and nourishment over presentation. Slice into it today, and you'll find more than salmon and breadcrumbs. You'll uncover a reminder of careful budgeting, shared meals, and a generation that made the most of what was in the cupboard. Waldorf salad. Long before kale bowls and trendy vinaigrettes filled modern menus, there was a crisp, creamy salad that felt positively sophisticated. Waldorf salad appeared frequently in mid-century editions of Betty Crocker cookbooks, bringing a touch of hotel elegance to everyday tables. Its origins date back to the 1890s at New York's famed Waldorf Astoria Hotel, where it was first served as a simple combination of apples, celery, and mayonnaise. By the 1950s, American home cooks had embraced their own variations. Chopped walnuts added crunch, seedless grapes brought sweetness, and sometimes a bed of crisp lettuce framed the creamy mixture. What made Waldorf salad special wasn't complexity, it was contrast. The tart snap of apples against smooth mayonnaise. The cool crunch of celery paired with soft fruit. It was refreshing yet rich, simple yet refined. Served in glass bowls or molded neatly on plates, it carried a sense of occasion. For post-war families aspiring to a bit of cosmopolitan flair, this salad felt like a taste of the big city. It appeared at luncheons, bridal showers, and holiday dinners. The ingredients were accessible, but the name carried prestige. Saying Waldorf alone elevated the meal. As tastes shifted toward lighter dressings and less mayonnaise-heavy dishes, the salad slowly slipped from favor. Modern palates often prefer vinaigrettes to creamy blends. Still, one spoonful brings back that balance of sweet, crisp, and creamy textures. Waldorf salad reminds us of a time when even a simple apple could feel elegant, and when a bowl of fruit and nuts, dressed just right, could make an ordinary meal feel just a little more grand. Impossible pie. There was something almost magical about a dessert that made its own crust. Impossible pie, popularized in the 1970s through Betty Crocker recipe booklets, felt like kitchen wizardry at a time when convenience foods were booming. The concept was simple but astonishing. You blended eggs, milk, sugar, flour, butter, and coconut in one bowl, no separate crust, no complicated layering. The thin batter was poured into a pie plate and baked. Somehow, as it cooked, the mixture separated into distinct layers: a lightly firm base, a creamy custard center, and a golden top. It seemed impossible, and that's exactly what made it memorable. The rise of baking mixes and streamlined recipes in the 1970s encouraged home cooks to embrace shortcuts without sacrificing homemade pride. Impossible pie fit perfectly into that mindset. It required minimal effort yet delivered a dessert that looked thoughtfully prepared. Variations soon followed: chocolate, pumpkin, even savory versions with cheese and vegetables. But the classic coconut version remained the favorite. Its sweet aroma filled the kitchen, and once cooled, each slice revealed delicate layers that felt far more complex than the simple ingredients suggested. As scratch baking regained popularity and elaborate pastries returned to fashion, impossible pie lost some of its shine. It became associated with a specific era of convenience-driven cooking. Yet there's undeniable charm in its clever simplicity. It represents a time when innovation meant making life easier, when a single bowl and a bit of faith could produce something surprisingly elegant. Impossible pie wasn't just dessert, it was proof that sometimes the simplest recipes hold the most delightful surprises. Sloppy Joe casserole. Before drive-through windows defined convenience, there was a baked dish that turned a messy sandwich into a tidy family meal. Sloppy Joe casserole found its way into mid-century editions of Betty Crocker cookbooks, offering a practical twist on a beloved classic. The familiar base began with browned ground beef simmered in a tangy tomato sauce, sweetened slightly and brightened with onion and green pepper. But instead of spooning it onto hamburger buns, home cooks spread the savory mixture into a baking dish and topped it with biscuit dough, cornbread batter, or even mashed potatoes. As it baked, the topping turned golden and crisp while the saucy filling bubbled underneath. It was comfort food designed for busy households. Children loved the sweet and savory flavor, while parents appreciated that it stretched a pound of beef to feed everyone at the table. There were fewer spills than traditional sandwiches, and leftovers reheated beautifully the next day. During the 1960s and 1970s, casseroles symbolized efficiency and warmth. They required one dish, minimal cleanup, and brought families together at dinnertime. Sloppy Joe casserole captured that spirit perfectly, familiar flavors transformed into something hearty and shareable. As fast food chains and frozen dinners gained popularity, many home-baked casseroles slowly disappeared from weekly rotations. The sandwich returned in its original form, and the baked version faded into nostalgia. Yet there's something deeply satisfying about breaking through that golden topping to scoop up the rich, saucy filling beneath. Sloppy Joe casserole reminds us of practical kitchens, noisy dinner tables, and an era when creativity meant reshaping simple ingredients into meals that felt new all over again. Some recipes fade quietly, not because they weren't good, but because time simply moved on. These forgotten dishes from Betty Crocker once filled kitchens with warmth, practicality, and a little mid-century magic. Maybe it's time to dust off those stained recipe cards and give them another chance. If one of these classics brought back a memory or surprised you, let me know in the comments. And if you love rediscovering the flavors that shaped American tables, make sure you're subscribed. There are still plenty of lost recipes waiting to come home.